I did not expect that Sala's would work with those god hunters. With Sala's assistance, their invasion will become much smoother, remarked Wasir suddenly, shaking his head after keeping silent for a moment. He too recognized the seriousness of the situation this time. Brian, half a month ago, one of my followers named Luca had mysteriously disappeared. There has been no news about him even till now. Those I sent to investigate his disappearance reported that only Han Hao's followers had passed through the area where he disappeared. What the hell was that about? Complained Log angrily. Han Shuo stared blankly for a moment before he put on an astounded face and replied, "Oh, really? That's surprising. I will ask Han Hao for you later and see if he knew about it, but I believe that it had nothing to do with his followers." Then, as though he thought of something, he put on an alarmed look and said, "Could it be that those of the God Hunter Alliance have already infiltrated the Fringe? I think that is most likely. Log, we need to be united at this time. Don't you fall to our enemy's ruse to divide us." Log got furious after listening to Han Shuo's barefaced lie. He shouted, "How is possible for the God Hunter Alliance to arrive so soon? They definitely will not hastily step into the Fringe without a year of preparation and planning. Just own up to your actions. You must have gotten it wrong." Han Shu shook his head and explained, "Although I have only returned to the Fringe today and wasn't aware of it, I'm sure that Han Hao's followers wouldn't touch your followers. This definitely had nothing to do with us." Log was going to continue arguing, but was interrupted by an annoyed Tyre. "That's enough. What's the point of arguing over such a petty matter? Those god hunters are coming and we need to be united against them. If we are fighting among ourselves now, we might as well surrender the Fringe to them." After Log and Han Shuo finally ceased their arguing, Tyre took a deep breath and asked, "My fellow sovereigns, do any of you have a solution in mind?" Log, Wasir, and Asura shook their heads. Han Shuo, however, put on a smile and said, "Well, I do have an idea." Chapter 924, Scheming. Chapter 924, Scheming. Oh. Tyre straightened his body and smilingly said, "Please, tell us about it." Han Shuo still had an unruffled look, as though the God Hunter Alliance was no threat at all, as he slowly explained, "Inform the 12 dominions that the God Hunter Alliance will be assembling at the Fringe. I bet they would be more than happy to take long journeys for exterminating the God Hunter Alliance that had always been scattered and in hiding." That does sound like a plan, but I'm afraid that, when those of the 12 dominions have come to the Fringe, they will not just exterminate the God Hunter Alliance, but we Fringe dwellers as well. Tyre wore a grimace as he explained, "Although we Fringe dwellers are not as unpopular as the God Hunter Alliance, we aren't exactly liked. Most of us Fringe dwellers used to be criminals from every dominion. I'm afraid that when their army came, they would exterminate us along with the God Hunters." That's right. Brian, you might not know, but there are many who felt that the Fringe should not exist on Elysium. If they feel that they have a chance at eliminating the tumor, which is us, from Elysium, they will do so. We could be hoisting our own petard. Those of the God Hunter Alliance could escape everywhere, but we cannot. We could be exterminated by the forces of the 12 dominions before the God Hunters could invade our land," explained Asura after he sighed. He sounded rather helpless. "Humph, don't forget that your Han Hao used to be a member of the God Hunter Alliance. Once those of the 12 dominions arrive at the Fringe, they will exterminate Han Hao and his God Hunters before destroying the Fringe," sneered Log. "Alas, we seem to have an unsolvable challenge before us," remarked Tyre with a worried frown. "Then we shall fight. If we can obtain early victories, the God Hunter Alliance will hesitate," said the rather quiet Wasir suddenly. Tyre immediately voiced his agreement as though he had planned to do so since the beginning. "This is an unavoidable war. We must fight." He looked at Han Shuo and Asura before he asked, "As long as the 5 of us could work as one, we will stand a chance against them. Gentlemens, what do you say?" Han Shuo could tell that Tyre and Log must have planned something before the meeting, but he decided not to point it out bluntly. He merely shrugged and replied, "Well, I'm the youngest here, so I guess I'll just follow you elders' plan. I will do my best to contribute as a member of the Fringe." "Excellent! What a lad!" Tyre laughed heartily as though he was very satisfied with Han Shuo's answer. He said, "There's a good chance that the God Hunter Alliance won't invade as one army. So here's the plan. The 5 of us will each guard one side of the Fringe. If any of us were attacked, we immediately start defending while informing others about it. If any of us could no longer hold the enemy, the other four will send reinforcements. Tyre explained his plan in detail, covering every aspect and every possibility. It was clear that he had given a lot of thought into it. In short, the five will each defend one side of the fringe and stay connected using magical mirrors. And if any of them ran into a powerful attack, the other four would send reinforcements. Although the God Hunter Alliance had Salah's assistance, their military intelligence capability would still be poorer than the sovereigns who ruled the land. If any faction of the God Hunter Alliance got too far from their main army, the forces of the five sovereigns would immediately assemble and defeat them in detail. Tyre's plan seemed rather sound and reasonable. Log would frequently nod as Tyre explained. He did not ask any questions or voice any disagreement. Asura opposed the plan. However, as he could not offer a better alternative or find grounds to refute Tyre, in the end, he had no choice but to agree to it. "Brian, are you okay with the arrangement?" asked Tyre smilingly after turning his gaze at Han Shuo. "No problem, none at all. I concur fully and wholeheartedly," replied Han Shuo after he jolted slightly. It seemed as though he had been roused from a daydream and had not been listening to Tyre. But Tyre did not take offense. Seeing that his objective had been reached, he laughed heartily and said, "Very well, then it is decided. We shall defend the side of the fringe that our Omphalos gate is facing. But I believe that it will be at least half a year to 1 year before the God Hunter Alliance could invade us. We should use this time to converse strength, build up energy, and keep collecting intel to prepare for the war ahead of us. Tyre, the five of us should issue a joint statement to every faction in the fringe and let them know what's happening. They too must contribute in defending the fringe against the God Hunter Alliance, which can only be done with the five of us commanding them," spoke Log suddenly. "Of course," Tyre grinned and replied. "Actually, I have already delivered an ultimatum to all big and small forces in the fringe that they must surrender to either one of us and join our army within half a year. They may immediately separate from us once the crisis is over. Those who would not defend the fringe will be banished." "That's fantastic." Han Shuo got up, and with a big smile on his face, he said, "I see that you have taken care of the necessary work for us. I guess there's no longer anything that I should worry about. All right, we shall meet again when the God Hunters have reached the perimeter of the fringe." After finishing those words, Han Shuo took a glance at Asura and Wasir and left. The sovereigns did not discuss any further after Han Shuo's departure. Wasir and Asura took their leaves and left Tyre and Log in the lounge. "Humph, that kiddo is definitely growing more and more domineering." Log smiled sinisterly and said, "He is the prime target of the God Hunter Alliance. If we move away from the side that he will be guarding, the God Hunters will naturally go in his direction and attack him. And by then, even if the God Hunter Alliance cannot finish him, we will. Don't worry, after this war, there won't be a pandemonium or House of Han in the fringe." Tyre put on a faint smile and continued, "All right, we should make full use of the time to rope in as many of the factions as possible. The combined power of those forces is extremely great, and this is a rare opportunity for us to tap into that power. We had been letting them do as they wished for many years, and now is the time for us to reap the benefits." "Haha, Brian is definitely still clueless that we have already subdued most of them. I bet that Wasir, Asura, and Brian will be pissing their pants real soon," sneered Log. At the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy of the Omphalos, Asura and Han Shuo was having a drink. They sat facing each other with a coffee table between them. "Brian, how do you feel about Tyre's plan?" asked Asura after downing a glass of wine. Han Shuo gently swayed the wine glass in his hand and stared into the dark red wine thoughtfully. After a long while, he answered in a deep voice, "It's obvious that Tyre and Log had planned it ahead of time. But I wonder if they are planning against the God Hunter Alliance or us. It's probably both. They likely are planning to use the God Hunter Alliance to weaken us." Humph, Tyre and Log had committed all kinds of despicable and shameless acts. "If they sell out information about our defenses to the God Hunter Alliance and abandon us during crucial moments, in the future, the fringe will be theirs," replied Asura. "I've been thinking about what you said in the meeting, that people do not want the fringe to exist on Elysium. That may be true, but they need the fringe to exist. Without it, the criminals would have nowhere to go, and the crime rate in every dominion will soar. A moment of impulsion, greed, or even something as simple as a spat could turn a good man into a murderer. Therefore, be it now or in the future, there will be no lack of criminals. The Dominions could hunt down the criminals to stop the crimes, but it would be much easier if the criminals would just leave and go somewhere. And Fringe is a haven for those people, a place where they can move to and call home. In the past millions of years, although the Fringe had been purged several times, multiple sovereigns rose and fell, and yet, even to this day, it persevered. That was not a coincidence, said Han Shuo, whose eyes were glistening. Asura suddenly realized what Han Shuo was hinting at, and he exclaimed, "You mean? There is a necessity for the Fringe's existence, and therefore the 12 dominions will not wipe it out of existence. However, they wouldn't let the Fringe grow too strong either. They will attack the Fringe every once in a while to weaken it, but never to exterminate it," continued Han Shuo. "So you intend to carry on with your idea and disclose the Godhunter Alliance's plan to 12 dominions?" asked Asura. "Maybe. But I think that a round of cleansing is long overdue for both the Godhunter Alliance and the Fringe." Han Shuo did not answer Asura's question directly. He smiled and said, "Tyre and Log may scheme, but so can we. Asura, by then, if you run into trouble, come to my pandemonium." Asura put on a pensive look and nodded. He then took his leave. After Asura left, Han Shuo summoned Zavik and instructed, "Inform every House of Han members that we will leave for the pandemonium in 3 days." Chapter 925, A Mysterious Visitor. Chapter 925. A mysterious visitor somewhere in the northwest of the pandemonium was a wild mountainous region. There, Han Hao, Han Tu, Han Jin, and Han Mu were undertaking construction work under the ground. They had bored a large number of narrow, intertwining tunnels connecting more than 1,000 big and small chambers at 500 feet underground. 3 of the mountains above them had their contents hollowed out and carved into enormous, spacious stone chambers. However, there was no lighting, furniture, or electricity installed, and none inhabited those spaces. "Elder brother, we are so exhausted. We have dug out 1 underground palace and 3 mountains. That was a really arduous project," said Earth Elite Zombie, whose face had taken on a mud-yellow shade. Perhaps it had something to do with him having used up most of his energy. Metal Elite Zombie was in similar conditions. The originally golden armor on his body had turned dull, and he looked very tired. In the underground palace, where only his brothers were around, Han Hao's callous face went much softer than usual. He raised a brow before fishing out a rock that resembled dried mud and a shiny, jade-like rock with lights flowing within, and presented them to Han Tu and Han Jin. As soon as Han Tu and Han Jin saw the 2 items, their eyes lit up like spotlights. Simultaneously, they bluntly snatched the items from Han Hao's hands. The unremarkable yellowish stone began to release a great amount of the yuan energy of Earth as soon as Han Tu grabbed it, as though it was dissolving into his hand. Weariness gradually lifted from Han Tu's face, and his eyes were once again glowing with energy. Han Jin, meanwhile, was rapidly munching down the jade-like stone, crushing it with his teeth and swallowing it. After eating the stone, Han Jin put on a bright smile and asked, "Elder brother, where did you find these treasures?" "I have traversed countless mountains and valleys, but I never had the luck to find an Emperor Claystone or a gold jade stone. They are the most nutritious essences of earth and metal." "I got them by robbing," answered Han Hao calmly. "Hee, eldest brother is indeed the best. Being able to burn, kill, and loot every day, that must be fun," remarked Han Tu in his foolish smile. "What about me? Little Gold and Little Earth each got a treasure. Where is mine?" asked Han Mu. "I have not found anything suitable for you, but I will keep an eye out," replied Han Hao after taking a glance at Han Mu. "Then thank you in advance. Other than treasures, please also keep an eye out for beauties. As elder brother should know, I love making life," said Han Mu in a lecherous grin. "The 3 of you should return to the pandemonium. My followers and I will handle the rest here. It would take us at least a year to install all the lightings and furnishings across the entire space," said Han Hao. "Understood, brother. I think I will bore another tunnel connecting this base to the pandemonium on my way back. With the additional tunnel, we could easily reinforce each other's bases," said Han Tu smilingly. "That'd be great," said Han Hao after he nodded. Then a thought entered his mind, and he suddenly ascended to the surface. Han Hao's face had returned to the callous and unfeeling look upon reaching the surface. He looked at a henchman of his that was kneeling on the ground and asked, "What is it?" "There is a message for you, my chief." The henchman bowed and handed Han Hao a scroll. After reading the scroll, a sinister light flashed in Han Hao's eyes. He burned the scroll into ashes, turned to his kneeling henchman, and instructed, "Tell every one of my chiefs to assemble. We will be taking a trip away from the fringe as soon as possible." The henchman of Han Hao's was astounded. He did not understand why Han Hao would ask the God Hunter chiefs, scattered in every region of the fringe, to assemble and leave for seemingly no reason. However, the henchman did not ask any questions. He respectfully acknowledged Han Hao's command and left. Han Hao then returned to the underground and said to his brothers, "Father has a task for me. I will have to be away from the fringe temporarily." "What task, brother?" Han Mu giggled and said, "Bring me along. I have been feeling quite bored recently." Han Hao shook his head and resolutely declined. "My God Hunters and I will pretend to be those of the God Hunter Alliance. We are going to strike travelers and merchants in strategic places to alert the dominions of the God Hunter Alliance's gathering. We are also going to spread certain information. You are not suited for the task. Besides, Father will be returning to the Pandemonium soon, and he might have tasks for you by then." "Oh, okay. Never mind then," replied Han Mu, slightly disappointed. Han Hao then immediately departed, leaving the enormous construction project halfway done. Han Jin, Han Tu, and Han Mu then slowly made their way to the Pandemonium, with Han Tu creating another tunnel along the way. Glacial Peak. Wazir, a cultivator of the energy of water, was sealed inside an enormous block of ice. It looked as though he had been frozen there for tens of thousands of years and was not revealing any trace of life. The glacial peak was frozen all year, and the average temperature was around -70 degrees Celsius. There were certain spots on the glacial peak where the air was especially cold and ice could form. The frost cavern that Wazir had sealed himself in was the coldest spot on the glacial peak. It was so cold that it could even kill a high god. Wazir had selected the glacial peak as his base because of the extreme environment. By burying himself in the coldest spot, Wazir's cultivation could be accelerated. The chilling ice around him could also inspire a deeper understanding of the frigid nature of the water element. Outside the frost cavern where Wazir was cultivating sat a row of high gods of water. They were covered in snow from head to toe and looked like snowmen. Only a minute flow of energy could be detected in their bodies. Unlike Wazir, these high gods were too weak to cultivate in the extremely frigid frost cavern and could only utilize the cold air blowing outside it. Despite being only a fraction as cold as the center of the frost cavern, those high gods still benefited greatly from it. Their cultivation speed was more than 3 times greater than other water element cultivators. The 5 snowmen, sitting cross-legged, had their eyes closed as they silently absorbed the cold air blowing from the frost cavern. Suddenly, one of them opened their eyes. He saw that a shadow of indefinite shape was moving with the wind before it disappeared. At first, the person thought that it was just his imagination playing tricks on him. But after taking a moment to sense the environment, he was shocked to discover that there were a few breezes of air blowing towards the frost cavern. Cracking noises sounded from his head to toe as he started thawing his frozen body. He cried, "Oh no, we have an intruder in the cave." The wind should constantly blow outwards from the frost cavern, but just then, the wind moved in the opposite direction for a split second. Someone must have entered the frost cavern at a high speed. The faces of the other 4 high gods also jolted, and cracking noises also started sounding from their bodies. One of them asked in panic, "What should we do?" "What else should we do? Inform his lordship, of course. The lord should still be cultivating in the ice. If he cannot come out from the ice in time, he could be in danger," replied the person before hastily charging into the frost cavern. "Stay where you are." A chilling voice suddenly sounded from the frost cavern. The 5 immediately halted their hasty footsteps when they heard the command and stared blankly at the person who discovered the intruder. The person was stunned for a moment before he returned to his spot and sat cross-legged on the ground. He said to his comrades, "The Lord has spoken. He is not in danger and we have nothing to worry about." His comrades nodded and also returned to their seats. One of them asked, "Ansett, do you have any idea who this visitor is?" Ansett, the one who noticed the intruder, shook his head before he answered. "I did not sense any aura that I'm familiar with. He should be an expert on the same level as his lordship. There are only a few of them in the fringe. Lord Salas and Log used to come here often. Could it be one of them?" "I doubt it," replied Ansett's comrade. "They had always visited our lord openly. Besides, Salas left the fringe long ago, and there is still no news of him. As for Log, I heard he had a disagreement with our sovereign recently, so I don't think that it would be him." The five of them could not hear the conversation in the frost cavern, giving them no clue of who the mysterious visitor could be. Hours later, a faint shadow shot out from the frost cavern in an instant and rapidly vanished into the horizon. The five of them had been waiting for the visitor to leave, so they had a chance at finding out who he was. Although they had used their full observation power, they were still unable to determine the person's identity. It's definitely not Sovereign Log or Salas. Otherwise, instead of absolutely nothing, they would have left at least a slight trace of the elements of death or lightning in the atmosphere, remarked Ansett long after the visitor left. Then who could it be? One of the high gods was puzzled. The person's silhouette seemed majestic, and the air behind him stirred a trace of sinister aura. It felt rather similar to that someone who had recently thrust himself into the limelight, remarked Ansett after thinking in silence for a moment. "You mean the one from the Pandemonium?" All four of Andre's comrades cried out simultaneously with amazement. "Ahem!" A disapproving sound suddenly came from the frost cavern. The five of them were jolted and terrified. They immediately shut their mouths tight, not continuing their chit-chat. Chapter 926, Partying. Chapter 926. Partying. After half a month of traveling, the House of Han had finally arrived at the Pandemonium. With the nourishment of the intense elemental energies and wood elite zombies' green fingers, the Pandemonium was filled with verdant green plants, beautiful, fragrant flowers, and towering trees. The air was fresh and rejuvenating. Other than the houses erected on ground, there was also an immense underground palace in the Pandemonium. Every hallway and chamber was fitted with magical lamps and relevant furnitures in place. There was more than enough space to accommodate every member of the House of Han. The House of Han members fell in love with the Pandemonium almost immediately. Phoebe, Emily, and the others cried out in awe when they saw the serene, springtimey landscape. There are layers upon layers of defenses around the valley. Even a so-called overgod like Tyre would have trouble sneaking into the Pandemonium, while an ordinary high god will die if they try to intrude. This is the true foothold for our House of Han. All those who are in the Pandemonium are insiders. You can assimilate those souls without worrying that the public might discover it, explained Han Shuk smilingly. He felt glad that his family members were now truly safe. "I truly am impressed with this location. We can gain deeper insight into the elemental energies by cultivating here. Brian, you are remarkable to have concentrated the elements in this area. It's extraordinary," remarked Iremike. "Wonderful. We will definitely progress faster in our cultivation." In her lovable smile, Emily turned to Han Shuo and said, "After the countless hardships we have gone through, we finally have a place we can truly call home. Gone are the days of living under another person's shadows. This calls for a celebration, to say goodbye to our arduous past and hello to a bright future for our House of Han," suggested Phoebe, who was in high spirits. Everyone became more excited after hearing Phoebe's words. They voiced their agreement that they should drink and feast. Naturally, Han Shu agreed. With one thought, one of his demon generals flew into a round platform at the center of the Pandemonium and fiddled with one of the matrices. Suddenly, the thick, menacing mist that shrouded the Pandemonium began flowing into the towering stone pillars surrounding them. In just moments, the thick mist was reduced to just a soft, thin veil of whiteness. The bright moonlight was allowed into the valley, illuminating its heavenly scenery. Beautiful moonlight, elegant buildings, luxuriant, colorful plants, fragrant flowers, and charming angels. At this moment, the Pandemonium had lost all trace of menace and turned into a paradise. Following Han Shu's command, the crates of fine wines were taken out from the underground warehouse and served. The most delicious fruits from all over Elysium were plated on crystal dishes. Under the moonlight, the company drank to their heart's content. Goron, ramen, the 5 elite zombies, and others who happened to be in the pandemonium exited the underground palace and joined the merrymaking. Han Shuo relaxed and enjoyed himself to the fullest in this hard-to-come-by peacefulness. He took turns drinking with his harem. Although everyone in the party possessed great strength and could easily neutralize the alcohol with their divine energy, they deliberately allowed the alcohol to mess with their systems and intoxicate them. They chugged down strong alcohol like it was water. As for Han Shuo, after drinking non-stop and actively boosting the effects of alcohol in his body for 2 days, he finally felt a slight tingling in his finger. On the second night of the party, Han Shuo carried Emily and Fanny, whose faces were flushed and slightly drunk, one on each arm, into his underground palace with a great chuckle. Phoebe, Jasper, and those who were usually rather reserved had not received Han Shuo's nourishment for a long time and were craving for it. With alcohol removing their shyness, they automatically followed behind Han Shuo to his underground suite. Han Shuo's underground suite was more than 3,000 square feet in size, containing 6 big and small rooms and a great living room of more than 1,000 square feet. The floor was covered with the soft fur of a certain beast. This suite, decorated by Rose, could not be more cozy. Han Shuo did not bother taking them into one of his bedrooms, but immediately mounted Emily and Fanny on the soft carpet in his living room. Before long, Phoebe, Jasper, and the other ladies entered his suite without being asked. Han Shuo went on one conquest after another. After a long night of attacking pink fortresses, Han Shuo smiled with gladness as he gazed at the field of mesmerizing, naked bodies laid across his living room. Back when Han Shuo was still on Earth, not even in his wildest dreams could he imagine having a girlfriend. But today, he had just been gang-banged by a group of beauties, and not just any beauties. Every one of them had looks that would make Aphrodite jealous. Han Shuo reflected on his past life on Earth and how different things were now. He was proud of his achievements in this world. The goddesses in the living room had fallen deep asleep after being satisfied to their limits. Han Shuo the Satisfier, however, did not feel the slightest wear. After scanning their bodies for a while, Han Shuo's mind suddenly jolted and he quietly walked out of his suite. Upon exiting, he saw a lonely figure with calm, cold eyes and long, silvery hair standing quietly. It was Rose. Rose seemed somewhat flustered when he saw Han Shuo suddenly appearing, as though she did not expect that Han Shuo could still be awake after banging so many women consecutively. She said, "I happened to walk past here, so I thought I might as well tidy up your suite." Han Shuo smiled and replied, "There's no need for that anymore. Haha, I'm sure that at least one of them will help me with cleaning the place." Rose took a peek into the living room, scattered with silky, flower-embroidered undergarments and the voluptuous bodies lying everywhere. For some reason, a sour taste suddenly flooded her heart. He already has so many of them. Of course he wouldn't need my help. Rose nodded quietly and turned on her heels with her head lowered. "Wait," cried Han Shuo suddenly. Rose immediately turned around, and a hint of excitement and anticipation glistening from her eyes. She softly asked, "Yes, it's time to nullify our master-slave contract." Han Shuo smiled and continued, "I promised you that I wouldn't bind you under slavery for too long, and it's about time for me to fulfill my promise." Rose's head was once again lowered, and she pouted her lips slightly in disappointment. She mumbled, "Of course, you now have countless powerful experts. To you, my strength is now insignificant, and I'm no longer useful. You would do just fine without me." Han Shuo was startled after seeing that Rose was hurt by his words. He forced a smile and said, "What are you talking about? I'm nullifying the slave contract because I do not feel the need to bind you anymore, because I now trust you without any reservation. Don't overthink it." Rose raised her head, looked deeply into Han Shuo's eyes, and asked, "Do you want me to leave?" "Of course not. Even with the contract nullified, there wouldn't be much changes in our relationship. The pandemonium will still be your home, and you will still be a member of the House of Han. You have nothing to worry about," reassured Han Shuo. "A member of the House of Han?" Rose put on a strange look on her face and mumbled to herself for a moment before she softly asked, "As what? What will I be in the House of Han? What will our relationship be?" Han Shuo stared blankly for a moment before he smilingly replied, "As my friend, you will be my friend and no longer my slave. I will still treat you like before. Nothing will change." It seemed as though this was not the answer that Rose was looking for. However, she did not object, adding, "I'm not nullifying the contract. It's not time yet." Han Shuo laughed out of bafflement. He looked at Rose with a confused look and replied, "You sure are a strange one. Back then, you urged me to emancipate you every day. But now that I'm nullifying our contract, you refuse? Why?" "I don't care. I won't nullify the contract before the agreed time." Rose did not answer Han Shuo's question. She softly groaned and put on a stubborn look. After having lived with Rose for decades, Han Shuo knew that she could be stubborn at times, and there was no way to change her mind. He shook his head smilingly and replied, "All right, fine. If you are so insistent on being my slave, there's nothing that I can do. But you can come back to me anytime to nullify the contract. I will never eat my words. I'm just abiding by the agreement. HMPH, you shouldn't overthink either," said Rose with a cold face. She took yet another glance at the living room and remarked, "If you do not exercise any restraint, sooner or later, it will be overused and become dysfunctional." Upon finishing those words, Rose turned around and quickly left. Han Shuo grimaced, shook his head helplessly, and sighed. "Dumb, she's attracted to you?" A soft cry suddenly sounded from behind Han Shuo. Emily, wrapped in soft textile, slowly walked to him. "I know," replied Han Shuo with a slight grin. Chapter 927, Little Skeletons Arranged Love GDK 927. Little Skeletons Arranged Love, you know? Emily smiled and asked, "Then why did you act like that?" Han Shuo pulled Emily into his arms and softly replied, "Women, power, wealth, I already have all that I've ever wanted in life and more. It is about time that I start being content with what I have. Besides, I have very limited time and can barely spend enough time with you all. She would be lonely if she was with me." Emily gently pressed a finger on Han Shu's chest, raised a brow, and giggled. "Is that so? That doesn't sound like the Brian I know. Hee, just look at how many ladies are inside your room right now. You're telling me that you've changed your ways? Who would believe you?" Han Shu grimaced and awkwardly scratched his head for a moment before he explained, "I used to be promiscuous because I was in a very unique realm state in my cultivation. It was necessary. I had no choice." Emily rolled her eyes and replied, "What a load of hogwash." Han Shu put on an innocent face as though he had been accused wrongly before he suddenly put on an evil smirk and replied, "Woman, you don't believe me when I tell you the truth, yet you fall for lies. This makes me angry. I shall have to punish you. You'll have to catch me first." Emily tried to slip away with her soft, smooth skin, but was buckled tightly in Han Shu's arms and failed to escape. Han Shu took her into a bedroom and gave her a good round of pounding. Half a year passed in the blink of an eye. During that time, the land of chaos had only become even more chaotic. Tyre and Log had been spreading the news that the Godhunter Alliance would soon be invading, and demanded that all fringe dwellers temporarily submit to the command of the sovereigns. All fringe dwellers understood just how grave the situation was, and they submitted to the sovereign of their choosing, hoping that the fringe would endure the attack of the Godhunter Alliance. As criminals that came from all over the Elysium, they understood that the fringe was the place that they could truly call home, and that if the fringe fell into the hands of the Godhunter Alliance, not only would they lose their home, they would become prey of the Godhunters and die by having their divine energy consumed. Those fringe dwellers were not going to surrender their home without giving it a fight. They ceased their infighting, assembled their forces, and contacted their sovereigns. With Tyre and Log having acted early and having a greater reputation, most of the fringe forces had surrendered to the two. Wasir and Asura understood that the greater the forces they commanded, the better position they would be in during the upcoming war. They began making promises and using their wealth to influence the faction leaders. Tyre, Log, Wasir, and Asura had activated all their resources and means to pull as many fringe dwellers into their temporary commands as possible. Han Shuo, however, despite being qualified to accept those fringe forces under his command, had not made such an effort. On the contrary, the Pandemonium had publicly declared that they would not accept any fringe dwellers or forces. Han Shuo's actions were completely beyond reason and expectations. Several faction leaders who were inclined towards Han Shuo had even visited the Pandemonium in person, hoping to persuade Han Shuo otherwise, but they were rejected all the same. While all other sovereigns were busy gathering as many forces as they could, the pandemonium was doing absolutely nothing. Although the House of Han's celestial pearl continued to open for business in the Omphalos as usual, not a single core member of the House of Han had been seen in the public. Even Han Hao and his powerful Godhunter faction had mysteriously disappeared from the fringe. People rarely ever discover their trails. The pandemonium's mystifying and seemingly unreasonable actions had made the four sovereigns and all fringe dwellers very puzzled. But as the pandemonium was protected by terrifying defenses and shrouded under a thick mist, no one could even get close to it to scout out any information. No one knew what the pandemonium's plan was against the great looming threat. Time flew and 3 months more had gone by. Tyre, Log, Wasir, and Asura had received intel Godhunters had been very active around the borders of the Destiny, Death, Space, and Lightning dominions. Upon receiving the news, Tyre immediately sent messengers to every sovereign, inviting them to discuss the matter. The messenger sent to the Pandemonium, however, was declined, with Strathome giving the excuse that Han Shuo was in secluded cultivation. Without Han Shuo, the sovereigns reassembled and discussed why the Godhunters would appear at the borders of the four dominions. Tyre and Log were especially puzzled. They couldn't understand why those Godhunters would do something as foolish as attacking those gods traveling between those dominions. The Godhunter Alliance, who was moving to attack the Fringe, should try to conceal their movement as much as possible, and would never reveal their trails before reaching the Fringe. Impudently attacking travelers between the four dominions would not only do them no good, but it might also invite counterattacks from the divine guards of the four dominions. Therefore, those actions of the Godhunter Alliance seemed completely unreasonable to them. The four sovereigns spent a whole day discussing the intelligence, but yielded no conclusion. They could only ask their followers to continue keeping an eye on those regions. Over an unregulated region between Ethereal City and the Fringe, Han Hao was wearing a surprised look as he stared at someone he did not expect to meet. "What's the matter? Is it about my face?" Scarlet, who had brought all her followers from Ronson Canyon to Han Hao, asked smilingly. She thought that Han Hao was surprised by the lack of scars on her face. "Why are you here?" Han Hao bunched his brows. Scarlet was stunned and looked at Han Hao puzzlingly. She asked, "Didn't you ask me to come?" Han Hao shook his head and resolutely replied, "No." Bitterness filled Scarlet's heart as she suddenly realized that Han Shu had lied to her. She stared carefully at Han Hao before she sighed and said, "I thought that you wanted me to come here. Since you do not want me here, I will return." "Who told you that?" asked Han Hao after keeping silent for a moment. "The House of Han Patriarch. He came to Ronson Canyon, killed every faction leader, and healed the scar on my face. He told me that you wanted me to come to the Fringe." Scarlet lowered her head disappointedly and mumbled to herself, "I should have known this is not your way. You wouldn't be concerned about anyone. Why would you ask me to come to the Fringe? Indeed, yet again, I'm being delusional." Han Hao thought it was strange that Han Shu had told her so. Suddenly, a bizarre thought came to him. Aya's father trying to be my matchmaker. When he began exploring that awkward idea, it seemed as though something deep in his soul was touched. He started gazing at Scarlet foolishly, and his mind was thrown into disorder. Something seemed to be thawing his ice-cold heart. "I'm going back to Ronson Canyon. Goodbye. Take care." Scarlet felt ashamed and uneasy under Han Hao's uncanny gaze, and humiliated for being fooled into traveling thousands of miles for nothing. She wanted to leave the place as soon as possible. "Don't leave," said Han Hao softly after keeping silent for a long time. Scarlet was stupefied. She opened her round eyes wide and stared at Han Hao as though he had become another person. What did you say?" Scarlet spoke stammeringly as her heart palpitated. "I said, don't leave." It seemed as though Han Hao was not used to speaking so gently, and he found it awkward. He did not know what was going on with him, and he found his actions rather baffling. Scarlet gasped, You have never spoken to anyone in that manner." Her face suddenly lit up, and her eyes shone like a star. It was as though she had become 1,000,000 times more gorgeous and captivating than she already was. "With those words of yours, traveling thousands of miles was worth it." A most inexplicable feeling was suddenly evoked in Han Hao. He did not understand this bizarre and unfamiliar thing that made him somewhat flustered. He returned to that callous and cold demeanor and said, "Now that you are here, you must obey me. You will do as I command." Deep in Han Hao's heart, he had decided not to treat Scarlet as he would to others of his followers. This feeling made Han Hao very uncomfortable. Therefore, he switched back to his default demeanor and attempted to be the one in control. Scarlet nodded happily and submissively. With a dazzling smile on her face, she replied, "I will do anything for you. I would even die for you." "Very good," Han Hao nodded, satisfied with the answer. Then he callously commanded, "Come here, let me touch you." Scarlet's face instantly turned red, and in a shaky voice she asked, "Wah? What? Let me touch you? I don't know why, but I want to touch you," replied Han Hao as he scratched his head. It seemed as though he did not understand why he would want to do that. "Okay." Scarlet secretly took a peek at a few of her followers who were standing nearby, wearing puzzled faces. She felt so ashamed that she wanted to dig a hole and bury her head in it. With her head lowered, she slowly walked towards Han Hao. Chapter 928, How Strong He Has Become. Chapter 928. How strong he has become. Scarlet might have been the only female among the leaders of the Godhunter factions in Ronson Canyon, but she was just as vicious and merciless as others. She was infamous for her scheming against others. But ever since Han Hao saved her life, she started treating him uniquely. Rather than scheming against Han Hao, she would scheme to help Han Hao. For some reason, the inhumanly callous teenager was like a strong gravitational field that was gradually pulling her. And as time went by, she found herself deeper and deeper in his gravity. Had it been any other person who told her, "Let me touch you," in front of her followers, she would have killed the person immediately. And even if she could not defeat the person, she would scheme to have the person dead at all costs. However, after hearing those words from Han Hao, although Scarlet was very embarrassed, she did not feel any anger. She even foolishly walked to Han Hao as he had commanded, as though she had forgotten that many of her followers were still around. Scarlet was blushing across her face. Her head was lowered, too shy to meet Han Hao's gaze. This ruthless Godhunter faction leader who hailed from Ronson Canyon was now a shy, bashful lady. She felt nervous and stood silently before Han Hao. Meanwhile, Han Hao seemed unsure and perplexed. The strange, bizarre desires that came from the depths of his heart had caused him to be somewhat at a loss. He did not understand what was going on with him, or why he would have such peculiar and messy ideas in his mind. Han Hao stared blankly and hesitated, not knowing if he should act upon those novel ideas surfacing into his mind. "What are you waiting for?" Scarlet had been standing there and waiting for a long while. She only got more and more nervous when Han Hao stared at her without doing anything before finally breaking the silence. "Okay," replied Han Hao softly. It was as though Scarlet's words had made him stop hesitating, and he finally extended his hand and very slowly, but awkwardly stroked his palm against Scarlet's tender, red cheek. In that instance, a most bizarre, inexplicable sensation, which Han Hao had never before perceived, suddenly flooded his heart. Scarlet's followers, who had traveled thousands of miles with her from Ronson Canyon, stared at their leader, utterly flabbergasted. They could not believe their own eyes when they saw that this devil who had led them to commit massacres and various atrocities, whom they had only known to be ruthless, ferocious, and inviolable, was willingly allowing Han Hao to caress her. It was as though the chief they knew of had transformed into another person. "And LT, I and GT, don't tell me that she has brought us all the way to the fringe just so that Han Hao can touch her. What in the world is going on?" And LT/I and GT, the instant that Han Hao's skin made contact with Scarlet's, her body shivered lightly. She felt somewhat uncomfortable and wanted to move her cheeks away from Han Hao's ice-cold palms, and yet, at the same time, she felt as though her face was drawn to them by an invisible force. Scarlet stood there as still as a rock and allowed Han Hao's hand to caress her lovely face. She felt embarrassed but secretly delighted. Gradually, it seemed as though touching her cheeks was no longer satisfying enough for Han Hao. The bewildered Han Hao followed the thought that came from his heart and slowly moved his hand downwards along her soft white neck and towards her busty bosom. Scarlet jolted, and her face turned even redder. Alarmed, she thought, he's not thinking about doing that in front of all these people, right? Scarlet started trembling more and more violently, and she could no longer feign her calmness. She suddenly raised her head and looked at Han Hao. To her surprise, Han Hao was wearing a vacant face. His brows were slightly bunched, as though he was deep in thought. Scarlett could not find a trace of lewdness on his face. It was as though he wasn't touching an outstanding beauty, but a weapon or an armor. He meant only to explore instead of doing anything indecent. What is he thinking of? Scarlett was puzzled. No matter how good one was at hiding their emotions, in such a situation, no man could possibly hide all trace of their lustful desires. Han Hao, however, seemed to be an exception. While Scarlett was pondering, Han Hao's hand had slowly moved downwards and gently grasped her tender, bosomy breast. Eck! One of Scarlett's followers, who had been watching from a distance, could no longer contain his astonishment and involuntarily made an unpleasant cry with his throat. Scarlett was jolted from her pondering, and she suddenly took a step backward, freeing herself from Han Hao's wicked clutch. She panted heavily, as though she had just finished a marathon. She spoke haltingly, Han Hao, how could you? Very strange. Han Hao mumbled to himself as he stared at his right hand that felt scarlet. As soon as he placed his hand on Scarlett's chest, he felt a strong urge suddenly surge from below. His heart was set racing, and his mind was thrown off from the absolute calmness he had always maintained. Little Skeleton was also shocked that he seemed to have gained a new bone. But before he could carefully experience the sensation, Scarlett had hastily withdrawn herself. The surprised Han Hao stared blankly for a moment before he shook his head, as though trying to cast away that strange sensation off his mind. He looked at the blushing and startled Scarlett, and in an expressionless face, he flatly said, "Okay, that is all for today. We will try that again next time." Scarlett became even more embarrassed. She secretly peeked at her distraught followers, gritted her teeth, and inwardly cursed, "You scoundrel, how could you do that in front of so many people? Couldn't you have done it somewhere more secluded and private? Are you trying to humiliate me? How infuriating. Seen enough yet? Piss off." Scarlett shouted at her followers angrily with murderous eyes, directing her resentment towards them. Understood. Those dumbstruck followers of Scarlett came to their senses and hastily scattered. After those god hunters left and the two were alone, Scarlett took a deep breath to try to calm herself before she asked, "What exactly do you want from me?" Han Hao stared blankly for a moment, and the default callousness he had just restored yet again crumbled. For some reason, Han Hao could not seem to maintain his absolute unfeelingness in front of Scarlett. After thinking for a moment, having no idea what exactly was going on with him, Han Hao bunched his brows and replied, "I haven't thought it through yet." "Haven't thought it through yet?" Scarlett was enraged. She screamed in her mind, "You've touched my face and even my breast in front of so many people, but you are telling me that you haven't thought it through yet. Then tell me, am I your woman or not?" asked Scarlett while trying her best to contain her anger. "Yes," replied Han Hao straightforwardly and without the slightest hesitation. But before Scarlett could feel happy about it, Han Hao quickly added, "Now that you are in the fringe, you are mine, just like Polo and the others. You are under my command. Right, I will need to put those that come with you through a round of training." Just like Polo?" Scarlett had heard of Polo before. She anxiously said, How can we be the same? Polo is a male and I'm a female. Besides, you've just..." "All the same," Han Hao put on a flat face and callously said, "You are both my subordinates, there's nothing different." After hearing those words, Scarlett flew into a rage out of humiliation. She yelled, "Han Hao, what exactly do you want? How could you be like this? Do you think you can just toy with my feelings? If you will only consider me as just another follower of yours like Polo, then we are over." Han Hao immediately felt lost and weak when Scarlett flipped out. He felt as though he had done something wrong, but he had no idea what it was. He bunched his brows and thought about it deeply. Then, he realized something. When facing Polo, he would never have those strange and passionate ideas. "Yes, it's a bit different." Han Hao scratched his head and mumbled, "You are a woman, so you are my woman. And Polo is a man, so he is my man, right?" Scarlett was between laughter and tears listening to Han Hao mumbling nonsense to himself. How can Polo be your man? You aren't making any sense." Then, suddenly, Scarlett was reminded of some words that Han Shuo once said to her. Han Hao had never been intimate with the opposite sex. He used to live and cultivate in an inhuman world, and he knows absolutely nothing about that certain thing. Scarlet lamented in that realization before she asked, Han Hao, do you know what a romantic relationship is? Han Hao looked at Scarlet puzzlingly, shook his head, and answered, I don't. I have never seen or heard of it before. Suddenly, it all became clear to Scarlet. It turned out that Han Hao wasn't being insensitive, trying to humiliate her, or playing with her feelings. He had absolutely no idea what he was doing. It seemed that his actions moments ago were merely out of instinct. Scarlet felt as though she had found a treasure, and she now found that clueless and puzzled look on Han Hao to be endearing. She was also rather surprised that such a handsome, callous, and incredibly powerful man had never experienced a romantic relationship before. No wonder, thought Scarlet as she shook her head. She completely forgave Han Hao for what he had just done and decided to grab onto this rare gem and fill his empty brain with her love. Oh no! When Scarlet was just going to start indoctrinating Han Hao with her ideals, Han Hao's face suddenly jolted and he gravely cried, Bring your followers to the fringe. Leave this place immediately. What's going on? Scarlet panicked a little. She realized that something was wrong. It's Dagmar, he is coming. I have met him before and I recognize his aura. Han Hao wore a grave face and said to Scarlet, You leave this place immediately. I will hold him back. Our hegemon? Scarlet was alarmed and she anxiously proposed, Why don't you run and let me hold him back? You cannot stop him, not even for a second. Han Hao wore a chilling face and instructed, Listen to me and leave. Don't worry, I will be fine. He cannot kill me. Scarlet stared at Han Hao for 3 seconds before she nodded resolutely and said, Okay, I will leave right away, but you must live to see me again. Scarlet then immediately left and shouted, Everyone come with me, we must fly. Scarlet's followers who were waiting nearby were oblivious to the danger. They followed Scarlet puzzlingly and hastily left. Han Hao held his 3-meter long bone spear and stood silently, waiting for Dagmar's arrival. 10 minutes later, the masked Dagmar sitting on a white bone throne suddenly appeared. Evidently, Dagmar's target was Han Hao alone, and he took no action about Scarlet. We meet again, Han Hao. Dagmar sat in the middle of his white throne high in the sky. He stared down at Han Hao, who was taking a hostile posture, arrogantly with a hint of amusement in his eyes. With a sinister smirk, he asked, Oh, are you thinking of fighting me? Hegemon, greeted Han Hao indifferently. Han Hao, I have been generous with you. Why did you have to betray me for that Brian guy? Dagmar extended his hands that were hiding under a pair of long sleeves. They were thin, pale white, and had long, sharp nails that looked like hooks. The energy of death gradually accumulated around his fingers and formed grayish stands of wavering smoke. Han Hao stared back at Dagmar with ice-cold eyes and without any of the confusion he had shown earlier. In a calm voice, he replied, My apologies, but you simply do not possess the strength that would make me bow. Dagmar sneered and disdainfully said, But Brian does. What can he give you? Don't you forget that you are a god hunter, and he is not. No matter where or when, your identity will always be one of a god hunter. You will never be free from that shackle for the rest of your life. The God Hunter Alliance is where you belong. Han Hao nodded and said, That's right, I cannot change my identity as a god hunter. However, I can change my status and position among the god hunters. He pointed at Dagmar with his bone spear and announced coldly, Hegemon, let me tell you this. One day, sooner or later, I will command the God Hunter Alliance and become the master of all god hunters. How vain, Dagmar snorted disdainfully. His white bone throne suddenly started crashing down, taking along an overwhelming energy of death. His hands, around which light gray smoke curled, suddenly started dancing. Rays of gray fell from the sky and buzzing sounds echoed. It took me tens of thousands of years to ascend and become one of the hegemons. Who do you think you are? How conceited of you to dream of ruling all god hunters. Today, I will take back everything that I have bestowed upon you. Dagmar had enough of chatting and wanted to end the conversation. His white bone throne began shooting out bone spears as he spoke. You have nothing to do with anything that I have. All that you've given me is a title, as chief of the god hunters. It's so insignificant that it's not even worth mentioning. An evil light flashed through Han Hao's purple demon eyes as the 7 bone spurs flew out from his back at astonishing speeds. However, instead of striking Dagmar, who was airborne mid-attack, the bone spurs soared in 7 directions around him. 7 distinct energies suddenly dispersed from each bone spur, and this was subsequently followed by the screams of an untold number of wretched souls imprisoned in those bone spurs. At this moment, the energy of death, mixed with a power that Dagmar was not familiar with, began emanating pulses of energy waves. At the same time, Han Hao's chest suddenly bulged outward, and the tombstone he had obtained from the Netherworld tore out of him. It instantly erected before him and expanded into an enormous monument. All of a sudden, the intricate and cryptic carvings on the tombstone sprung to life, separating from the tombstone. Thousands of inscriptions, resembling mystical beings, revolved around the stele, resonating with the miserable shrieks of those wretched souls that were imprisoned in the 7 bone spurs. All the elements of death within a 100-mile radius of Han Hao were absorbed by the tombstone in an instant. Even the elements of death that Dagmar, an over-god, had gathered around him were drained and taken. The death elements he had integrated into his attack had somehow turned chaotic, and he felt as though he was losing control over it. Then, Han Hao, with the 3-meter-long bones spur in hand, suddenly let out a piercing scream. An even more intense energy fluctuation emanated from the tombstone, and it directly affected the energy of death in Dagmar. He was shocked to discover that the energy of death in his body was rapidly escaping and sucked into the tombstone underneath him. What the hell? Dagmar peered at the towering tombstone below in disbelief. The tombstone that was originally only several dozen meters tall had swelled and was now as tall as a mountain, perhaps caused by it having absorbed all the elements of death within the 100-mile radius. After the tombstone was enlarged, the previously tiny and densely packed inscriptions on it became visible. Out of nowhere, various white bones appeared under the tombstone. Streams of the energy of death flowed around the stele like veins in a human body, making it seem oh so mysterious and bizarre. The divine energy of death in Dagmar's body was being drawn to the tombstone. The bizarre energy fluctuations generated by the tombstone could not only affect the element of death, but also cultivators of the energy. The terrified and alarmed Dagmar immediately withdrew the attacking power he launched at Han Hao to recover the divine energy. He began pouring in every effort to stop his divine energy from being drained. As Dagmar was an over-god, once he gave up on attacking Han Hao and concentrated his effort on resisting the influence of the tombstone, he managed to stabilize the divine energy in his body, and his divine energy stopped flying into the tombstone. Impossible, impossible, Dagmar was panting heavily. His eyes, the only part of his face not covered by his mask, revealed his astonishment and fear. He no longer had a lofty and arrogant voice as he spoke. "You have not reached the over-god realm. You can't possibly possess such terrifying power. You can't be Han Hao. Who are you?" Han Hao at this moment was standing on the top of the tombstone. Countless streams of grayish air that seeped out from the white bones had enveloped him, and the trickling energy of death had submerged him. It seemed as though he had become part of the tombstone. Han Hao's voice sounded from the top of the tombstone. "This tombstone can affect all those who cultivate the energy of death without exception. Perhaps besides the overgod of death, no other cultivator of the death energy can kill me, which includes you, Dagmar. Even though you are a realm above me, you cannot kill me." What in the world is that thing? Dagmar was appalled. He believed Han Hao's words, for he had experienced the power of the tombstone firsthand. "I do not know either." Han Hao took a short pause before he continued. "I have yet to fully learn its power. But when I do, when I can unleash its full power, it will be your end, Dagmar." Upon finishing those words, an enormous vortex of death formed at the bottom of the tombstone. The mountainous tombstone started vanishing from the bottom as the vortex slowly rose into the sky. And when the tombstone was completely engulfed, the vortex collapsed into itself. A strong wind blew out of nowhere and dispersed all traces of the vortex. The towering tombstone, the 7 bone spurs, and Han Hao had vanished. Dagmar gazed blankly and dejectedly at the ground that had returned to normal. After a long while, he finally came to his senses. He shook his head as he said to himself, no wonder he wouldn't bow to my command, he's become so powerful." Chapter 929, Quintessence Shard. Chapter 929. Quintessence Shard at the Dominion of Death. Inside a stone chamber located in a towering mountain. The chamber was saturated with extremely concentrated elements of death. There, a mighty being was awakened, and it rose from the pool it was submerged in. It looked in the direction where Han Hao was and murmured softly, "Who could it be?" Concentrated death elements in liquid state overflowed from its mouth as it spoke. Every cultivator of the element of death had to absorb the element from the environment to strengthen themselves. This being, however, seemed to have broken this natural law and no longer needed the ubiquitous elemental power found all around the universe. What's more, the element of death would overflow from his mouth with each word he spoke. It was almost as if this being was the fountainhead of the death element, as though all death energy in every material plane had originated from it. "It seems that I have to take a trip to the dominion of destiny," the man murmured. Then, he seemed to dissolve into the death elements in the chamber and disappeared without a trace. At the dominion of destiny, at the massive central hall of the Destiny Goddess shrine, Andrina looked at the expressionless goddess of destiny with boredom and coquettishly begged, "Mother, I want to go out to play. I want to go find Brian. I know that he's in the land of chaos, it's just nearby." The goddess' eyes disappeared into squints as she smiled. Not a trace of her terrifying mighty aura, which Aobashi and the others had experienced in the Darkness Dominion, could be sensed. She appeared as though an ordinary mother, graceful and kind as she gently replied, "No, sweetie, not now, just wait a little longer. I will arrange for you to meet him in due time." "Why?" Andrina, chewing on energy stones like snacks, pouted and grumbled. The goddess of destiny stretched out her hand and caressed Andrina's soft and long hair, putting on a faint smile as she said, "There are certain things that I cannot reveal to you yet, but I can tell you that Brian is a key figure. He shouldn't be here, but his presence will alter the destiny of many." "What's so different about him? Why do you always say that Brian shouldn't be here? I know Profound Continent is only a low-level material plane, but there are plenty of successful people living on Elysium who originated from low-level planes." Andrina was a little confused. The goddess of destiny calmly explained, "He did not originate from Profound Continent, nor is Brian his original name. You will learn of this in time. His existence is an opportunity for all of us. One day in the future, we might even need his favor." Andrina was shocked and perplexedly said, "You all, the 12 overgods?" Smiling as she nodded, the goddess of destiny answered, "That is all that I can reveal to you for now. I promise you, when the time is right, I will tell you more." Then, suddenly, the destiny goddess stared blankly with her pair of eyes that seemed to contain galaxies. Stars seemed to be revolving in her deep eyes. She turned and gazed in the direction where Han Hao and Dagmar were fighting. She bunched her brows lightly and murmured, "Why would a piece of a quintessence shard appear here? It is of the death element, he must have sensed it too. I suppose he will be visiting my dominion." "Mother, what is it?" asked Andrina curiously when she saw her in a daze. "Nothing." Smiling as she stood up, the destiny goddess said to Andrina, "I'll be leaving for a while and should be back soon. Andrina, promise me, do not be naughty while I'm away and stay home. Okay?" "Of course, I will not leave," Andrina immediately assured her with a cute face. The goddess of destiny nodded. She bowed to gently kiss Andrina on her delicate cheek before she faded into thin air and vanished. Back to the battleground between Han Hao and Dagmar, where only the latter remained. Dagmar stared blankly for a long while before also leaving the scene. 3 days after the battle, Dagmar went to a volcanic crater near the fringe. Acer and Daka, the darkness and destruction hegemons, were waiting. When Daka, who cultivated destructive energy, saw Dagmar appearing above the crater with his bone throne, he frowned slightly and asked, "Dagmar, what's the matter? I can tell that something is wrong from that look of yours. Don't tell me that you have failed to settle that little brat who's causing us trouble." Acer was also rather baffled, and he said in a deep voice, "Dagmar, I know that he used to be a follower of yours, but you can't be reluctant with him. It doesn't matter if he has great potential, he is now our enemy. If you are to let him mess around in the borders of the various dominions, the divine guards from those dominions will come for us. By then, we will be forced to cease our invasion. Dagmar, if you couldn't do it, let me finish him for you. We can't let a puny little joker jeopardize the master plan that we have worked on for years," remarked Daka, who seemed displeased. The masked Dagmar glanced at his fellow hegemons and said, "I did try to kill him, but I failed." Not only that, I even lost an aching amount of divine energy to him. This kid has come to possess some sort of divine weapon that I've never seen. Somehow, it overpowered me. Daka and Aser's faces jolted when they heard the explanation. They both looked at him with disbelief, and Daka gravely asked, "Dagmar, are you sure about that? That kid is not even in the overgod realm. He couldn't match you no matter how powerful his divine weapon was. What exactly happened?" Aser was also shocked and looked at Dagmar with a puzzled and perplexed face. It's a gravestone with abstruse carvings on it. It emanated an extremely miraculous energy of death. Dagmar recalled the scene from 3 days ago and explained what he experienced in detail. He even told them his own understanding of the gravestone in as much detail as possible. After he finished speaking, the hegemon of darkness, Aser, stared blankly with an astonished look, while Daka stroked his long beard pensively. After a long silence, Daka suddenly realized something and raised his head, exclaiming, "It's a quintessence shard." Dagmar and Aser were shocked. Their eyes were full of incredible surprise. Dagmar's voice was trembling as he murmured, "Yes, yes, I should have known. It's the only thing in the universe that could unleash such power that would allow him to suppress me." Suddenly, a dazzling light of greed bursted from Dagmar's eyes. He completely lost his cool and grabbed both Daka and Aser, demanding, "Help me capture the quintessence shard. I will give you both anything in exchange. Anything you want." Daka and Aser exchanged glances, and they loosened the grip of Dagmar's hands, which were clutching onto their clothes tightly. Daka said with a solemn expression, "Quintessence shards are said to only exist in Eternia, and that place was sealed when the Creator last disappeared. How could there be a shard that was left out?" Aser also said with a heavy voice, "Although a quintessence shard is not the quintessence, as a vessel that once held the quintessence, it is still a powerful object, containing the most profound and complete understanding of its fundamental force. If, for any reason, a quintessence overgod perished, any ordinary overgod who holds a quintessence shard will automatically become the new master of the quintessence. This object is of great significance. The quintessence overgods will attempt to reacquire the shards at all costs and annihilate anyone who possesses one. For this reason, those possessing the shards would never dare to reveal it, and would hide themselves in material planes millions of light years away from Elysium. How the hell did that fella come to possess a shard? Dagmar managed to calm himself down somewhat as the two hegemons talked. He smiled bitterly and said, "How would I know? If he hadn't suppressed my power with that object, he would have been dead 3 days ago. With such a marvelous device in hand, it's no wonder his strength has been soaring. Had I known earlier, I would have killed him when he was in the dominion of death and taken the shard from him. Sigh, but it's too late for me to do so now. He has now become so powerful that besides the overgod of death, no cultivator of the death energy could touch him." After taking a short pause, Dagmar continued, "Therefore, I beg you, please help me acquire the shard. Once I possess it, I promise to find the quintessence shards of darkness and destruction for you too. How does that sound?" "Of course we will help you. We are all allies here, aren't we?" Daka agreed, smiling schemingly as he said, "As long as you can locate him again, Aser and I will do all we can to assist you." "Right, Aser?" Aser nodded silently. No one knew if he was being sincere. Dagmar had lived for countless years, and he had encountered all kinds of characters. He could tell from their tone that the two wouldn't be helping him in good faith. However, the temptation of the quintessence shard was just too great to Dagmar. And at present, it was only with the aid of these two hegemons that he had any chance of obtaining the shard. "All right, Dagmar, we still have to discuss how exactly we will attack the Fringe. That kiddo will definitely be there. Once we conquer the Fringe, he will have nowhere to hide and be forced to fight." Daka saw Dagmar's desperation for the shard and knew that he could not take it off his mind. Therefore, Daka tried to use the line of reasoning to get Dagmar back to business. "Understood. I will mobilize all the power in my hands. As soon as the kid appears in the Fringe, I will seize the shard from him at all costs." Dagmar took a deep breath and began considering if he could kill Han Hao using his subordinates who were not cultivators of the death energy. He even thought of Sala's, wondering what he could offer Sala's that would tempt him. The temptation of the quintessence shard had thrown Dagmar's mind into disarray. It was the only thing that he could think of. He was utterly obsessed. Chapter 930, Aroused GDK 930. Aroused a few days later, the goddess of destiny descended upon the location where Han Hao and Dagmar had fought. She did not wait for long before a faint shadow manifested in midair. The concentration of the death element in the area instantly shot up when the shadow appeared. It was more intense than what could be found in the pandemonium. The goddess of destiny, wearing a neutral face, turned to the shadow and said, "Hello, Nestor." The faint shadow gradually became more and more distinct until it turned into a handsome and feminine-looking gentleman. Elements of death continuously overflowed from his body in wisps of smoke. He nodded smilingly at the goddess of destiny before walking to her, and asked, "Althea, you were much closer when it happened, and you cultivate the Edict of Destiny. Do you know who holds the shard and where I can find them?" Althea, the goddess of destiny, put on a faint smile and replied, "You should know the characteristics of a shard as much as I. As long as the bearer does not use the shard, he would be beyond your detection. I cannot obtain more information on the shard bearer than you can. Shard bearers can always sense our presence, but we can only sense theirs when they are using it. What a threat they are to us quintessence over gods," remarked Nestor with his brows bunched. He seemed rather troubled. "Such is the will of the Creator. The shards exist to give the world hope, the slim but real chance of overthrowing us. I believe that the Creator had scattered the shards to remind us that we are not irreplaceable," said Althea in a neutral tone and expression. Nestor nodded lightly and said, "I will do everything I can to find this person. I will not allow any being who possesses a quintessence shard of death to live." Althea smiled, but did not give any more comments on the topic. She knew that she would do exactly the same as Nestor had been doing, to find and destroy the shard bearer at all costs if she ever discovered that someone possessed a shard of the Destiny Edict, to make sure that she remained the goddess of destiny. After keeping silent for a moment, Althea suddenly asked, "I heard that City Lord Hill of your Witherbone city has disappeared. Is it true?" Nestor let out a soft groan and answered, "If it wasn't for you, I would have ended that youngster already. Even our friend from the Darkness Dominion would have done that long ago instead of letting that kid off. His dominion lost 2 city lords, and it was a real mess." After taking a short pause, Nestor asked, "Althea, is that youngster really the key to unlocking Eternia?" "He is, indeed. It is impossible to unseal Eternia without him. It is enveloped with every known energy in this universe, and therefore no energy from this universe can unseal it," answered Althea affirmatively. She continued, "That is why I have asked you all to keep him alive. But when he has grown strong enough, after he unseals Eternia for us, you all may do whatever you want to him. You will hear no objection from me. But Althea, are you sure that we are not nurturing a snake in our bosom? This kid cultivates the energy left behind by that being, and his strength has been soaring at an incredible rate. I'm worried that one day, he will become so strong that even the 12 of us won't be able to defeat him," said Nestor. Traces of fear could be seen on his face, as though he was reminded of an extremely terrifying memory. "Don't worry, he will never attain the height of that existence. He exists only to unseal Eternia. Once he has fulfilled his purpose, you may do whatever you want to him. I will not care," Althea reassured again. She took a short pause before she instructed, "Pay attention to the fringe. A great chaos will rage across the land. Another 10,000 years have passed, and it's about time for it to be cleansed again." Nestor nodded. He put on a faint smile and replied, "I have made the necessary arrangements." "Oh, right. By then, if my forces happen to clash with those from the Light and Life dominions, please don't mind us. I couldn't care less about your petty conflicts. Do as you wish, as long as you do not drag the entire Elysium into war," said Althea with a rather annoyed look before she said calmly, "Please remind our friend over at the Darkness Dominion not to touch the kid before Eternia is unsealed. All right, I have said all that I should say. Goodbye." Upon finishing those words, Althea's figure gradually diffused into the air. A gentle breeze blew away all remaining traces of her. Nestor did not leave the area right after. Using the element of death overflowing from his body, he reached a massive area of land around him and took his time to survey it. He concealed his mighty aura and became a most ordinary, inconspicuous god of death before finally going on his way. After several months of havoc-making at the borders of various dominions, Han Hao finally returned to the fringe. As soon as he escaped from Dagmar, he reassembled every one of his god hunters and commanded them to return to the fringe with him. Dagmar's appearance meant that the main army of the God Hunter Alliance will be reaching soon. As Han Hao had accomplished his objectives, which included spreading a certain rumor, he knew that it was time to disperse and return home. Besides, through the gravestone that was in his body, Han Hao sensed that Nestor, the over-god of death, was approaching. The threat from the God Hunter Alliance army was nothing compared to Nestor. Han Hao could constantly sense Nestor's aura and his general location, something that even Hill and others who were bestowed with divine brands from Nestor could not. Back then, Han Hao had settled in the Ronson Canyon, at the border of the Death Dominion, and wouldn't venture any deeper into the Dominion, because he was wary of this terrifying existence who was constantly within his senses. Although Han Hao had no idea what the gravestone really was, or that Nestor couldn't sense his location when he wasn't using it, out of his survival instincts, Han Hao always tried to keep as far away from Nestor as possible. Soon after returning to the fringe, Han Hao went to Scarlet, who had been anxiously waiting for his return. Scarlet could not be more emotional and delighted when Han Hao suddenly appeared before her. If it wasn't for the large number of her followers around her, she would have thrown herself at Han Hao and embraced him. For some reason, Han Hao felt a sense of gladness in his heart to see Scarlet filled with such joy. He felt as though he was facing Han Shu or his 5 brothers. "Come, we will return to our base and get ready for war," said Han Hao. "I'm glad that you're all right, Han Hao. Did you meet Dagmar?" asked Scarlet after calming down from her excitement. "Yes, I have," answered Han Hao straightforwardly. You really met Dagmar?" Scarlet was astounded. She exclaimed, "Then how is it that you seem completely unscathed? Dagmar is the hegemon of death, the ruler of all god hunters in the Death Dominion. His power. He cultivates the energy of death and therefore he cannot kill me," replied Han Hao. He did not tell Scarlet about the gravestone as he himself didn't understand the weapon completely. Scarlet seemed perplexed, unable to understand why Dagmar could not kill Han Hao just because he also cultivated the energy of death. However, she did not ask Han Hao for clarification, as Han Hao seemed disinclined to talk about it. Scarlet decided to resume her original plan as they journeyed to their base. Over the next period of time, Scarlet tried her best to educate Han Hao on a certain subject. She would often send her followers far away and tirelessly lecture Han Hao on romantic relationships, attempting to indoctrinate his naive and empty mind. But Scarlet soon discovered that Han Hao wasn't so good a student. Han Hao didn't learn by listening to others, but through his own experience and exploration. All along the journey, although Han Hao had been listening to Scarlet's teachings, he did not accept them. He kept silent and shied from giving any comments. The most he would do was bunch his brows. One day, the two came to a hill covered with lush green grasses and flowers that gave off faint, refreshing fragrances. The cotton-white clouds slowly sailed with the gentle wind. It was a relaxing and serene place, most conducive for a certain activity. "Han Hao, have you been listening to anything that I've said? Did you understand anything at all?" asked Scarlet softly. Han Hao shook his head, and with a blank face he replied, "I have no idea what you were saying. Even if I do, I would not simply accept it just like that. I only learn by touching, feeling, and experiencing for myself. I will only take what I find true, not from the words of others." Scarlet was at a loss for words for a moment. She asked, "What exactly do you mean by touching and feeling?" "Just like that day, to use my hand to touch and use my heart to feel," replied Han Hao with a brow raised. He seemed to think that Scarlet's question was silly. When Scarlet was reminded of what Han Hao did the other day, her cheeks immediately turned red and her heart palpitated. She bashfully took a peek at the serious-looking Han Hao and murmured to herself, "This bastard. So that's how his brain works. Then what should I do? Should I let him freely explore my body again? You are agitated. That is not good. This will affect your realm's state and make you unable to perform your best in a battle. You should be like me and always be calm," advised Han Hao. Those words of Han Hao had irritated Scarlet. She frowned and rebutted, "I don't believe that you can always stay calm." Scarlet then gathered her will and marched towards Han Hao against her nervousness. Han Hao was going to say that his heart was always as calm as still water, but it was at that moment that his mind was jolted awake. It seemed as though something had awakened the gravestone that was in his chest, and he was losing control over it. Scarlet was annoyed by Han Hao's attitude. She thought, "I don't believe that I cannot stir up your heart." She became even more determined as she resisted her shyness and walked to Han Hao. Han Hao at this moment had his brows tightly bunched and his purple eyes were glistening brightly. It was as though he was pondering something and did not notice Scarlet's actions at all. He wasn't even looking at her. This exasperated Scarlet. She groaned hatefully and said, "I don't believe that you have no emotions at all." Scarlet suddenly opened her arms, stepped forward, and tightly embraced Han Hao. Her round, ample breasts turned to oblate spheroids as they were firmly pressed against Han Hao's chest. Scarlet also moved her hands around Han Hao's back and carefully felt the attachment points of his 7-bone spurs on his body. It's connected to the spine?" Scarlet couldn't help herself but to softly exclaim after realizing it. All along, Scarlet thought that the 7-bone spurs were just another one of Han Hao's weapons with special attachment points for him to wear them on his back. But now, after feeling them with her hands, she discovered that they were connected to his flesh and bones. They were part of his body. The astonished Scarlet continued to explore Han Hao's back with her small hands. She gently brushed her tender skin against Han Hao's, trying to arouse him. "I don't believe that you would have no reaction to this," thought Scarlet before she took a quick peek at Han Hao. Her face suddenly jolted and she exclaimed, "Han Hao, are you all right?" Suddenly, the gravestone slowly started emerging from Han Hao's chest as a strange energy erupted from his body, throwing Scarlet away. The cryptically carved runes separated the gravestone as though thousands of birds were set free from their cages. They revolved and danced around Han Hao. The elements of death from far and wide were drawn to him and began gushing into his body. Han Hao seemed to be in a daze. He stared puzzlingly at the runes orbiting him with his brows bunched. After hesitating for a moment, Han Hao slowly reached out and grabbed at the gravestone hovering right in front of him with one hand. He gently caressed the carvings on it with his thumb. Then, all of a sudden, those cryptic runes revolving around him started entering his brain through his ears. Han Hao jolted, and he immediately shut his eyes and stood still as though he had been fossilized. Chapter 931. Abnormality of the Gravestone GDK 931. Abnormality of the gravestone inscriptions that could fill libraries suddenly gushed into Han Hao's mind, immediately stunning him. He became as still as a rock. Meanwhile, the gravestone that emerged from his chest kept on gathering the elements of death, as though it wouldn't stop until every element of death in the fringe was sucked dry. But this time, the gravestone did not enlarge after accumulating the element of death, but brightly radiated a ghastly white light. The gravestone was densely packed with inscriptions, and only a portion of them had separated from the gravestone and entered Han Hao's brain. The inscriptions that remained began wriggling on the gravestone when it was illuminated by the ghastly white light, absorbing the element of death pouring from every direction. Scarlet, who was blasted off, was horrified. Not knowing what was happening to Han Hao, she stared at him in panic for a moment before trying to approach Han Hao to get a clearer picture. But before she could get close, another burst of energy erupted from the gravestone and again blasted her away. The burst of energy was intertwined with a strand of Han Hao's awareness. He had reduced the power that erupted from the gravestone. Otherwise, given Scarlet's strength, the energy would have instantly disintegrated her soul instead of just safely throwing her into the distance. After several more failed attempts, Scarlet gave up on getting closer to Han Hao. She stood in the distance and gazed at him anxiously, hoping that he would not be injured by this gravestone that appeared out of nowhere. The ghastly white radiances began flowing away from the gravestone and towards Han Hao like a most bizarre liquid. The motionless Han Hao was slowly enveloped by the liquid made of white light before every piece of clothing on him was suddenly shredded and expelled, laying his body bare before Scarlet. His pale white skin gradually turned transparent as though it had been transformed into a clear crystal. Scarlet could even see his veins, organs, and skeleton. Through the pores on his skin, the ghastly white light then started seeping into Han Hao's body and dispersed in his every bone and organ. He began emanating a death energy aura of extreme purity. Scarlet was relieved after seeing that the white light on the gravestone was not harming Han Hao, but was nourishing him and transforming his body. She stared at the transformation in amazement, while guessing what the divine weapon on Han Hao's chest was and pondering how something so marvelous and powerful was forged. After a long, long while, all the white radiances had fused with Han Hao's body, and the gravestone abruptly shrank and vanished into his chest. Simultaneously, the element of death stopped gushing into the region, and the environment immediately returned to normal. A moment later, Han Hao took a gentle breath and slowly opened his eyes. The volumes of scriptures rapidly faded away from his pupils, and he returned to normal. Han Hao gently bunched his brows and mumbled to himself, "So this thing is called a quintessence shard. Han Hao, are you all right?" exclaimed Scarlet as she rushed to Han Hao immediately after sensing that the boundary protecting Han Hao had vanished. She reached out with a hand to touch Han Hao's chest, where the gravestone had disappeared, to examine him. Han Hao shook his head. His hazy eyes returned to their usual cold calmness. He looked at Scarlet, who was still panicking a little, and softly replied, "Don't worry, I'm all right. My body and soul have just transformed for the better, and I've learned a few things." "What exactly just happened?" Scarlet was surprised to hear that even his soul was transformed. "Nothing," Han Hao did not explain. He lowered his head and looked at his naked body before withdrawing a black warrior's gown from his space ring and casually putting it on. It seemed as though it was only now that Scarlet realized that Han Hao was still unclothed. She covertly took a quick glance at Han Hao's bare body before bashfully turning away from Han Hao with her blushing cheeks. After putting his new clothes on, as though nothing had happened, Han Hao instructed, "Come, let's get moving." Nestor, the overgod of death, was still searching for trails of the quintessence shard near the border of the space dominion. Suddenly, he turned and gazed in the direction of the fringe. From the towering mountain, he murmured to himself, "It is in the fringe? Who could it be? Is it one of those sovereigns? With the general location known, it'll be much easier to find the bearer." The overgod of death, who had concealed his almighty power, stopped wandering around in the region aimlessly and headed for the fringe. Over at the fringe, the Osteoberg. Log, a cultivator of the energy of death, was receiving the leaders of various factions intending to submit to his rule. Without any warning, Log turned aghast, and he gazed in the direction of Han Hao with horror on his face. "My lord, what is the matter?" asked one of Log's henchmen after seeing Log suddenly pause his speech and revealing the bizarre reaction. Log did not respond. He got up from his seat and stared fixedly in Han Hao's direction. There was an unconcealable fear on his face. After staring for a while, he mumbled to himself, "Impossible, absolutely impossible. The overgod of death would never come to the fringe. But besides the overgod, who else could possess such formidable and pure power?" "My lord, is everything all right?" asked the henchman of Log again. "That will be all for today. The plan remains the same." "I must go," said Log, before immediately leaving his Osteoberg and a group of confused and puzzled guests. Over at the Pandemonium. During the half-year, the House of Han members had fully assimilated the divine souls in the crystal balls that Han Shuo had given to them. And during that time, the Pandemonium had been consuming a ton of divine essences of various energies. The large stockpile of divine essences that Metal Elite Zombie and the House of Han had accumulated over the years were almost completely used up during the 6 months. With their realm states improved, they started raising their divine energy levels by absorbing divine essences. This allowed them to make rapid breakthroughs. But as divine essences were rare and expensive, even the filthy rich House of Han and Metal Elite Zombie were unable to acquire enough of them. With that, the Pandemonians began facing a shortage. To make matters worse, there was a greater demand for certain types of divine essences, as most of the House of Han members cultivated the same fundamental forces. Divine essences of death and darkness elements had already been exhausted 2 months prior. With that, the Pandemonians found themselves in a frustrating situation. Progressing to the next realm required one to possess the relevant profound insight and divine energy. These House of Han members had the former but lacked the latter. They felt stuck, and gradually, they started to get somewhat desperate. While gaining divine energy was easier than gaining the profound understanding and insight of a fundamental energy, it was still a process that took time. Although the concentration of elemental energy in the pandemonium was much greater than elsewhere, and their cultivation was accelerated, these House of Hand members still felt that it would be too slow. They would need at least several decades to accumulate sufficient divine energy for each breakthrough, if they were to do so only through cultivating in the pandemonium. Although several decades wasn't that long of a time given their ridiculously long lifespans, to these House of Hand members, it felt unbearably long when there was a much quicker alternative. None of these core members of the House of Han were god hunters. However, some of their henchmen, like Goron and the others, were. The House of Han members who were thirsting for more power started inquiring them about a certain subject. It seemed as though they were tempted to commit the act. One day, Han Shuo, who was cultivating in his underground gymnasium in the pandemonium, finally made a major breakthrough. By assimilating 2 late-stage high god souls and devouring divine energies, his 2 avatars reached the late-stage high god realm. With the help of his miraculous and powerful consciousness, his 2 avatars managed to quickly digest the sea of memories contained inside the late-stage high god souls. And as one with complete control over his mind, Han Shu was immune to the addiction that came from devouring another person's divine energy. Therefore, occasionally, he would venture outside the pandemonium to nab unsuspecting fringe dwellers and devour their divine energy. With that, Han Shu's avatars were able to reach the realm of late-stage high god in just 6 months. He was progressing at a much faster rate than his family clan members. Stratham, gather every core member of my house. I have something to say. Han Shuo did not immediately proceed with stabilizing the new realm states, nor did he experiment with the power of his hybrid divinity domain. As soon as his avatars had reached new realms, he emerged from his gymnasium and gave Stratham the instruction. Soon enough, every core member of the House of Han was gathered before Han Shuo. I know that you all are getting impatient, and some of you are even thinking of becoming god hunters, said Han Shuo as he scanned the party. His glaring gaze moved a little slower when it swept across Gilbert, Iremike, and a few others. Han Shuo's consciousness covered the entirety of the pandemonium, and he knew every slightest movement and sound they made. Han Shuo continued in a grave voice, but this is not something that you can simply stop once you start. Yes, your strength will rapidly improve, but you will also descend into madness at an even faster rate. You will lose self-control, your minds will be corrupted, your intellect will be perverted, and you cannot stop doing it for the rest of your life. The long-term costs of doing so heavily outweighs the gains. I'm commanding you all right now, don't even think about doing it. Never. Han Shu knew just how addictive devouring another person's divine energy was. Only a few in the universe could overcome the addiction. He and Han Hao had only managed to overcome it with their extraordinary circumstances and abilities. Master, then what should we do? I can immediately make breakthroughs, I just need more divine energy, asked Gilbert, who seemed rather desperate. Don't worry, I have a plan, replied Han Shuo confidently. Chapter 932, She's My Woman. GDK 932. She's My Woman. Although Han Shuo could not let them devour another person's divine energy, he could extract divine energy from a person and process it with special medicinal ingredients, producing an elixir that would have similar effects to divine essences. I will find a solution to this, just don't be a god hunter. Han Shuo had always given them plenty of freedom and rarely intervened in their activities. The fact that he issued them a direct command prohibiting them from devouring divine energy showed that he was gravely concerned about the repercussions. Gilbert and the others had been hesitant about devouring another person's divine energy because they were also aware that becoming a god hunter was a path of no return. So as soon as they heard Han Shuo promising them an alternative, they immediately cast the idea out of their minds. All of them nodded and promised that they would not even dabble with the idea. Good. You should continue studying the memories you obtained from the crystal balls and get a better grip over their understanding of the edicts and elements. Also, do not leave the pandemonium for the time being. There's no need to concern yourself with the situation outside, said Han Shuo. Following Han Shuo's order, the party dispersed one after another. Deep in their hearts, these core members of the Han family understood that everything Han Shuo did was for their own sake. They were no longer desperate to raise their divine energies and went back to calmly study the profound knowledge in those crystal balls. Han Shuo then exited the underground palace, summoned Zavik, and demanded a report about the recent occurrences in the fringe. Tyre and Log have been meeting frequently. Together, the two of them have managed to subdue over 70% of all forces scattered around the fringe. Asura and Wasir are far behind. Most of the forces they have taken in are those who were already aligned with them. Combined, they have absorbed just 20% of all forces. The remaining 10% remain undecided. As of late, God Hunters have been unusually active in the borders of space, destiny, death, and lightning dominions, which has drawn great attention from cities in those dominions. It seems the God Hunter Alliance is just around the corner, and the Fringe is on the verge of being attacked. Zavik courteously and patiently reported the recent happenings in the Fringe to Han Shuo. When he completed his report, Zavik put on a confused look and asked, "My lord, many faction leaders have come to us, wishing to serve the pandemonium. Why did your lordship decline them? Wouldn't it be better to gather as much of the forces as we can, so that we would have more chips to use when the war breaks out?" Not just Zavik, but all those who dwelled in the Fringe were perplexed by Han Shuo's actions. Tyre, Log, Asura, and Wasir had fought high and low, and even offered all kinds of ridiculous rewards just to have temporary command over those untamed factions. They were going all in to assemble as big of a force as they could to give themselves the best chance of riding through the impending storm. Han Shuo, however, did the complete opposite. No matter who came to visit Han Shuo or which faction they represented, Han Shuo rejected them all the same. All those faction leaders who desired to submit to Han Shuo's command were flushed with embarrassment, as if their burning zeals were doused by barrels of iced water. Han Shuo put on the smile of a master schemer and replied, "We of the House of Han do not need strength in numbers. Fret not, everything is going as I've planned. We are not missing out on an opportunity here." Zavik remained no less confused after hearing Han Shuo's answer, but he didn't utter another word to convince Han Shuo otherwise. He understood that Han Shuo had a plan, and as Han Shuo's henchman, his duty was to execute Han Shuo's commands and not worry about the master plan. "All right, you are dismissed. Keep up the good work." Han Shuo waved a hand, gesturing to Zavik to go back to running his intelligence agency. Half a month later, Han Hao, accompanied by Scarlet and their followers, appeared inside the underground palace excavated for him by Earth Elite Zombie and Metal Elite Zombie. Han Hao's God Hunters had returned from various regions to the Fringe some time ago. Some of them had even relocated to the underground palace and the mountains nearby. Upon arriving at his new base, Han Hao summoned his chiefs to a chamber excavated from the belly of a mountain for a meeting. "Relay my commands, have everyone assemble in this base. We will no longer be scattered all over the Fringe. And cease attacking the Fringe dwellers for now, exercise self-restraint. After this is over, you may resume satisfying your inner urges." He began shooting orders as soon as everyone arrived. The chiefs, including Polo, nodded repeatedly, pledging to restrain their men during this period. They were all cognizant of the fact that they were at a critical time when every Fringe dweller had to unite against the greater enemy. If they were to continue hunting other Fringe dwellers, they would undoubtedly be condemned and denounced by everyone. Make good use of the time left and put all your effort into constructing and enhancing this base. It's well hidden. As long as everything is set up properly, we won't have to be too worried even if the God Hunter Alliance sieges this base. All right, you lot should start assigning tasks to your company. Whatever traps or boundaries you can make, put them up. The more the better, Han Hao pressed on. After taking a short pause, Han Hao pointed to Scarlet, who was standing quietly by his side, and introduced her. "This is Scarlet, one of us. She is of the same rank as the bunch of you." Polo and the others had sensed the distinctive aura of a God Hunter on Scarlet as soon as she entered the chamber. Without thinking, they knew that Scarlet must have been yet another faction leader who surrendered to Han Hao's command. They nodded but did not make any comments. Scarlet had been gazing at Han Hao with the eyes of a fangirl the whole time. It was only now that she realized just how much power Han Hao had accumulated. In the chamber, there were 3 chiefs with late-stage high god strength. The remaining chiefs had mid-stage high god strengths. Based on the number of late-stage and mid-stage high god experts in the chamber, Scarlet could tell that Han Hao now commanded a significantly greater force than what he had started with when he was still in Ronson Canyon. Even the combined might of those former Ronson Canyon faction leaders would pale against Han Hao's. Seeing the loftily standing Han Hao giving order after order in his callous and handsome face, Scarlet found herself helplessly awestruck by his charm. She couldn't help but recall the moment they hugged a few days prior. Although it only lasted for only a moment, it left an unerasable mark in Scarlet's mind. As Han Hao wrapped up his orders, he glanced at Scarlet and caught her with flushed cheeks and a somewhat enchanted gaze. He turned back and looked at his henchmen. He realized that Polo and the others were staring at Scarlet with fiery eyes. All of a sudden, he felt a pang of wrath for no apparent reason, as though he was being violated. When they were still alive, those faction leaders of Ronson Canyon had lewd and indecent ideas for Scarlet, even when there were 2 horrifying scars stretched across her face. Now that the hideous scars on her face were gone, she bloomed with an irresistible charm. It was no wonder characters like Polo and the likes would lust for her, as Han Hao had always been socially detached and had never before shown even the slightest interest towards the opposite sex before his subordinates. Polo and the others didn't at all suspect that the relationship between Han Hao and Scarlet was any different from theirs. They thought that Scarlet was just another subordinate of Han Hao's, and therefore they had the audacity to wantonly scan her body. Han Hao glared at his subordinates who were ogling Scarlet with immodest eyes, let out a cold groan, and sternly announced, "She is my woman. Look at her that way again, and I will gouge your eyes out." The lecherous looks on their faces were immediately replaced with appall, and they instantly averted their gazes from Scarlet. They understood that although their leader was rather young, he was cruel, callous, and most importantly, a man of his words. He would do exactly as he said with no compromise. While terrified, those chiefs were also baffled. Having served Han Hao for ages, they had never seen Han Hao express any sort of romantic interest in another living being. From their point of view, Han Hao was just an emotionless, unmoving rock. The party was greatly astonished to hear those words come out from Han Hao's mouth. They were almost in disbelief. Scarlet was irritated by their indecent gazes and was just about to lash out at Polo and the others when Han Hao suddenly made the threat. Scarlet was overjoyed and she felt as though her heart was filled with the sweetest honey. She threw a seductive glance at Han Hao as she thought, finally, he's starting to get it. We are sorry. We did not know that you were the chief's woman." Polo put on an awkward and embarrassed smile before bowing at Scarlet and said, "We are really sorry. We have never known that Chief is interested in women and therefore thought that." "Haha, really sorry about that." Polo was Han Hao's most senior aide and therefore immediately extended an olive branch to Scarlet. Scarlet no longer felt any anger at them. She nodded smilingly and magnanimously replied, "I will forgive you for doing so in ignorance. I won't hold grudges over such a trivial matter. We are all on the same side, after all." Han Hao cast a cold glance at Polo and groaned yet again. In a rather annoyed tone, he said, "That's enough talking, now go get busy. Those from the Alliance will be attacking very soon, and you bunch better have the defenses ready before they are here. There's no time to waste." Yes. Polo was yet again jolted. He stealthily took a peek at Han Hao as he thought, "Come on, I'm only having a few words with her and already you are separating us. Do you really have to be so possessive?" Polo and others hastily left to carry out their orders. Han Hao then led Scarlet to his underground palace and said, "Come, let's go to the pandemonium." Chapter 933, Duels GDK 933. Duels at the Pandemonium, inside a massive underground gymnasium. Sanguis was wielding his broadsword that was bursting with blood-red radiance and fighting Ballins and Gilbert. Hanshu was sitting on one side, quietly observing the battle. There was a thin mist made of blood surrounding Sanguis. His skin seemed to be stained by blood, and his eyes were glowing like a pair of terrifying red flames. Gilbert and Ballins were exerting themselves, pushing with their full strengths, but were only barely able to resist Sanguis' ferocious attacks. Sanguis was born with the body of Sanguis, an extremely rare type of body that was most suitable for cultivating blood god mantra, a subsect of demonic arts. Having tirelessly trained and cultivated, Sanguis had now reached an extremely profound realm in Blood God Mantra. Sanguis was able to easily root Gilbert and Balin's attacks and push them back by shooting bloody radiances from his broadsword. Han Shuo had been silently but closely watching the battle. When Gilbert and Balins were pushed so far back that they had no more room to retreat, Han Shuo finally intervened. He raised a hand, and an enormous palm materialized out of nowhere, blocking the two sides and ceasing their battle. "Well done, Sanguis, you have reached the most advanced level in Blood God Mantra," said Han Shuo as he nodded. He then turned to the rather disappointed Balins and advised, "Advancing in the god-slaying devil path requires constant bloodshed. Although you have reached the bloodlust realm, it seems that you're still lacking in your realm state. Balins, there are times when you have been too calm. This will make it difficult for you to go berserk in a battle and fall into a demonic trance state. If you can get into a controlled demonic trance in every battle, your strength will manifold. You need to put more effort into this aspect." Balins put away his flying sword, humbly bowed at Han Shuo, and asked, "Senior brother, how do I make myself fall into a demonic trance state during a fight?" "You need to allow yourself to lose rationality and go wild. This usually requires provocation from your enemy. However, you can still practice entering the state by yourself, or at least close to it. Try imagining things that make you mad and imagine your opponent as the person you hate the most. And try not to think too much when fighting, just fill your mind with the desire to slaughter," replied Han Shuo after thinking for a moment about his past experience of entering demonic trance. "Gilbert, a major component of your demonic arts practice is in tempering the soul. The other major component is your body, which I had forged in the same way that I would make a demonic weapon. Other than cultivating the energy of darkness, you must also pay attention to those two aspects. Master, I have reached the early stage high god realm, and my darkness energy is starting to merge with my demonic energy. However, I still feel rather stuck. Is there any other way to make the darkness energy fuse better with my demonic energy?" asked Gilbert. He was the weakest of the three, and he was most desperate to improve his strength. "I do not have relevant experience to guide you on fusing those energies. You'll have to figure that out by yourself." The demonic arts that Han Shuo cultivated was of the orthodox school, which was not practiced by Sanguis, Balins, or Gilbert. Even though Han Shuo had two avatars cultivating the death and destruction energy, he cannot fuse it with the demonic yuan of his main body, as the demonic yuan would reject those fundamental forces. In addition, as the power of his demonic yuan was orders of magnitude greater than that of his divine energies, fusing those energies would be extremely difficult. Han Shuo only had experience fusing two energies found in this universe, but not in fusing energies from different universes. "Master, why don't you teach me one of those demonic arts? I noticed that Balins and Sanguis are making progress much faster than I am by focusing their cultivation on one energy. Perhaps if I focus my cultivation on just one energy, I might make much greater improvements," said Gilbert. "That won't be necessary." Han Shuo shook his head and replied, "You are already at the early stage high god realm in your cultivation of the darkness energy. It would be a waste to discard that power. Besides, you are not on the wrong path, you've just yet to get the knack of it. Han Hao cultivates in two energies just as you do, and he has been improving rapidly." "Right, Han Hao will be here in a moment. You should ask him for advice later. He would have more relevant experience that would help you make breakthroughs." From the pandemonium, Han Shuo could sense Han Jin and Han Tu's souls while they were constructing Han Hao's new underground palace. Han Shuo and Han Hao could easily sense each other's presence from their respective bases. Therefore, Han Shuo immediately knew that Han Hao was on his way to the pandemonium, using the underground tunnel connecting their bases. Gilbert was delighted to hear those words. He laughed out and said, "So it turns out that the little fella is also dual cultivating. It's been a while since I last saw him. I wonder what he is like now." Gilbert had known Han Hao since way back. Centuries ago, Gilbert and Han Hao had been murdering and looting unsuspecting victims with Han Shuo back in the dark forest of Profound Continent. He had heard a lot about Han Hao's accomplishments and wanted to see how much Han Hao had grown in this hostile world called Elysium. Lights of excitement suddenly flashed across Sangui's eyes when he heard that Han Hao would be there soon. Sanguis had long wanted to meet Han Hao and duel with him to test their strengths, but he never had the opportunity. And during the recent period, Sanguis had been arduously tempering himself and made another giant leap in strength. He was in his top shape for a duel. This was the perfect opportunity that Sanguis had been waiting for. Therefore, immediately, Sanguis went to Han Xiu and requested, "Shifu, I wish to challenge Han Hao to a duel." "Haha, sure, go ahead. Through battles one identifies their weaknesses better. You need not restrain your power or give him any warning, just attack him right away. You can even launch a sneak attack. With me as the referee, it will be quite harmless," agreed Han Xiu immediately. Not only did he not show the slightest concern, but he also seemed very happy about it. "Thank you, master. This is fantastic." Sanguis was elated as he thought that Han Hao wouldn't have allowed it. Sanguis had always felt that no one, other than Han Xiu, was stronger than himself. Being a competitive youngster, Sanguis had been eager to prove that he was stronger than Han Hao through a duel ever since he found out about Han Hao's existence and identity. Time and time again, Sanguis came across credible rumors that Han Hao would be an extraordinarily powerful opponent. However, instead of making Sanguis think twice, it only made Sanguis even more excited to fight Han Hao. This was the opportunity he had been looking forward to for a long time, and he wasn't going to let it slip by. "He will be here very soon. You may go all in as soon as he steps inside," said Han Xiu with a smirk to the incredibly excited Sanguis. "Sanguis, do not hold back. If he could make someone like Polo kneel under his command, he should be more powerful than you are. Attack with your full strength," advised Ballins. He was also feeling excited as he had been looking forward to witnessing Han Hao's power. "Sanguis, Ballins and I are no match against you, but that little guy definitely is. This is going to be interesting. Let's see which of you is stronger," laughed Gilbert as he walked to Han Xiu's side with Ballins. As Han Hao did not conceal his footsteps or his aura, all those in the gymnasium could hear him approaching and sense the faint killing intent he emanated. They knew that Han Hao was right outside the gymnasium's entrance, and they stared in his direction with anticipation and excitement. "Master is inside," said Zavik softly after leading Han Hao to the outside of the gymnasium. Zavik was one of the few fringe dwellers who knew about Han Xiu and Han Hao's relationship. For many years, Zavik had been in charge of exchanging intelligence with Han Hao's followers. He was very much aware of the appalling acts the youngster standing before him had committed. And as a well-informed person, he knew that Han Hao undoubtedly commanded the greatest forces in the fringe after Han Xiu, Tyre, Log, Asura, and Wasir. And from certain aspects, the relentless and merciless Han Hao could even be considered as a character more terrifying than the sovereigns. The fringe has always been a place where the strong are honored. Therefore, even if Han Hao wasn't his master's son, Han Hao would still be treated with great respect. When Han Hao came to the gymnasium's entrance, he creased his brows, turned to Scarlet, and instructed, "Scarlet, stay here for a moment." "Okay," Scarlet nodded. She was feeling rather nervous and bashful as she knew that she was going to meet his father-in-law with Han Hao. A so-called sneak attack would be completely ineffective against Han Hao, as his soul was just too sensitive. He could sense the faint energy targeting him from inside the gymnasium before he was even close. Even though Sanguis had tried his best to conceal his aura and energy, Han Hao could still detect that Sanguis' killing intent was locked onto him. Han Hao also detected Han Xiu's presence in the gymnasium, and he reasoned that this person planning to ambush him was probably not an enemy. He was not worried about his own safety, but had asked Scarlet to wait outside, lest she be affected by the aftershocks of them clashing. After all, she was just an early-stage high god. After hearing Scarlet's response, Han Hao took on an aggressive demeanor. A 3-meter long bone spear suddenly emerged from the palm of his right hand. A chilling aura and terrible killing intent erupted from the bone spear in Han Hao's grasp. This shocked Zavik. Puzzled and panicking, he cried, "Young Master Han Hao, what are you doing?" "Don't worry, someone wants to duel with me." "It's gonna be fine," explained Han Hao before he finally stepped into the gymnasium. Immediately, the gymnasium was lit up by an intense burst of blood-red light, like a sun made of blood had appeared out of nowhere, while an intense reeking of blood flooded the gymnasium. Sanguis, carrying his blooded broadsword, and the sky filled with daggers made of blood, began descending upon Han Hao. Chapter 934, Han Hao vs. Sanguis GDK 934. Han Hao vs. Sanguis. Sanguis possessed tremendous strength, and needless to say, it was a terrifying sight when he unleashed his full power. Han Hao remained cool as a cucumber, not showing the slightest trace of fear against the blood-red radiances that shrouded the sky. He watched as the crimson-eyed young man descended from above, the murderous aura girding him ever so menacingly, yet he didn't fret. He whirled the bone spear in his hand. A sinister and wicked energy suddenly shot out from the bone spear and instantly disintegrated the red radiances. An evil gleam flashed through his purple demonic eyes before a large bone cage abruptly materialized. The hideous bone cage bore sharp spikes. It was positioned in Sangui's path with the open side facing Sanguis, as a shark waiting for its prey to swim right into its sawtoothed mouth. Sanguis was astounded as a shiver traveled down his spine. He finally realized just how terrifyingly powerful the callous teenager was. Not only was he able to neutralize the blood radiance attack that Sanguis congealed using blood essence with just a quick gesture, he even had spare energy to form a white bone cage using the energy of death. Sanguis had already exerted his full strength against Han Hao. For some reason, it seemed as though Sanguis gained access to his fullest potential when pitted against the most formidable opponent he had ever encountered. The blood-red flames in his eyes burned even more vigorously, with red trails overflowing from the corners of his eyes. His cheeks seemed to be overfilling with blood as his veins popped up under his skin. He looked like an angered, diabolical monster that thirsted for blood. Those were signs that he was pushing the blood god mantra to the very limit. Han Shuo, who had been standing aside and observing, took notice of the changes happening to Sangui's face. He gravely bunched his brows as he raised his guard, ready to intervene at any moment should things go south. Sanguis did not try to avoid the bone cage. When he accessed his full potential, the terrifying blood aura around him instantly congealed into matter. The mist of blood all around the gymnasium condensed into a red palm before it shot into Han Hao's bone cage. Crack! Boom! The bone cage shattered into smithereens and bone debris dispersed like snowflakes in all directions. Oh, Han Hao appeared a little surprised. A strange light flashed in his purple eyes as he stared intently at Sanguis, whose power seemed to have surged several folds. He even seemed somewhat excited. He could sense that Sanguis's power was extremely unique, and it was definitely not of the energies found in this universe. He also sensed the strong killing intent on Sanguis that was distinctive to cultivators of demonic arts. After Sanguis unlocked the fullest potential of his body, Han Hao would finally consider him as a worthy opponent. Han Hao waved the bone spear in his hand, and a deafening cacophony of ghastly cries and howls echoed from within as if thousands of tormented souls were struggling to break free. In an instant, the white bone spear turned murky gray, while thousands of hideous, malevolent faces appeared on its surface. They were writhing violently as though trying to escape from their eternal prison, but they remained securely bound to the bone spear. Charge! With a sudden swing of his arm, Han Hao threw the bone spear into the sky, making harrowing shrieks as it soared. Sinister dark radiances glowed from its tip as those souls trapped in the bone spear gathered into an enormous and hideous mouth lined with fangs. It charged at Sanguis ferociously. Gilbert, take a careful look, observe the energy that Han Hao has applied to the bone spear, said Han Shuo, reminding the thrilled Gilbert to tear his eyes away from Sanguis. Gilbert woke up from his daze and quickly realized that it was Han Hao's cultivation that he ought to emulate. He promptly gathered his concentration on little skeleton's bone spear and carefully sensed it with his soul. After making the observation, Gilbert became overwhelmed with shock. He detected the presence of thousands of ferocious souls on the bone spear. They were filled with immeasurable rage, hatred, despair, and bloodlust. Those negative energies fused with the energy of death and formed a newfound, one-of-a-kind energy of sheer terror. Gilbert had only been sensing the bone spear with his soul for a moment, but already, he could sense a vague power drawing him into the bone spear to make him part of the collection. Damn, even his weapon has become so terrifying. Sanguis is out of luck. Slash I, exclaimed Gilbert internally. Just as the thought appeared in Gilbert's mind, the gruesome bone spear-turned mouth swallowed Sanguis, who was caught off guard. In an instant, Sanguis had completely disappeared. There was nothing but an enlarged bone spear hovering over the battlefield. The bone spear seemed to have transformed into an enormous earthworm. It squirmed tirelessly. The fierce souls emerged and disappeared on the surface of the bone spear, rolling around rapidly in the chilling, misty air. Gilbert, Bollins, and others knew that Sanguis was now inside the bone spear, as bursts of blood-red flashes could frequently be seen reaching the surface of the bone spear from within. Evidently, although trapped, Sanguis was not immobilized. The flashes of red radiances indicated that he was still struggling vigorously, trying to escape from Han Hao's bone spear. By now, it was obvious that Han Hao's power far surpassed Sanguis. Despite his violent thrashing, his toil was to no avail. Those souls trapped in the bone spear had neither physical body nor blood and were completely unaffected by Sanguis' blood aura. They weaved tighter and tighter around Sanguis, wearing down his power with every passing moment. As time passed, it seemed as though Sanguis' formidable power was nearly exhausted. The red flashes that reached the surface of the monster bone spear grew weaker before they eventually stopped. Only then did Han Hao extend a hand. He curved his index finger to make a strange gesture and made a flick. All of a sudden, the writhing bone spur spat Sanguis out like a cannonball. He crashed into the ground feebly, and the murderous flames in his eyes vanished. It seemed that most of his stamina had been worn down while inside there, and he could no longer pose a threat to Han Hao. From start to finish, Han Hao had not moved much at all. Instead of launching aggressive and frenzied attacks with his body as Sanguis did, he simply maneuvered his bone spear around with his mind and effortlessly defeated Sanguis, who had pushed his blood god mantra to the peak. Clearly, Han Hao had unleashed just a portion of his full might. At this point, the chasm in their strengths could not be more obvious. Ashen-faced and panting heavily, Sanguis locked his eyes and stared at Han Hao. A good while later, he nodded and announced in a deep voice, "I've lost." Han Hao briefly peered at him, speaking no word in response. He then turned around and called out to Scarlet, who was standing by the door, "You may come inside now." Scarlet cautiously and bashfully trod into the gymnasium. Only then did Han Hao calmly explain to Sanguis, "Actually, your strength is rather decent, especially with your power to affect the blood. Still, it's useless against me as the amount of blood in my body is 1/100th that of an ordinary being. My body composition is unlike others and therefore, your energy has no effect on me." Han Hao began as just a skeleton with not a drop of blood in his body. Even though Han Xiu had later refined and enhanced his skeleton with unique methods, still, it contained just a few drops of Han Xiu's blood essences. And as Han Hao grew stronger, using the blood essences that Han Xiu had left in his body as a template, he started making himself his own blood. He used it for activating certain demonic techniques and forging demonic weapons. This type of blood was mixed with part of his soul energy and was shrouded in a mixture of demonic yuan and death energy. Hence, it was invulnerable to Sanguis' blood god mantra. As a result, the blood god mantra that worked on thousands and thousands of beings had no measurable effect on this unique life form called Han Hao. Besides, Han Hao's base strength was a whopping level above Sanguis', so Sanguis' defeat was only a matter of course. After hearing Han Hao's explanation, Sanguis' heart felt a little less bitter. He shook his head, put on a wry smile, and said, "I thought that you had somehow made your blood immune to my power. It turns out that you don't have much blood to start with. No wonder I lost. Tough luck for me." "Haha, Sanguis, energy may affect most people, but unfortunately for you, this fella isn't even human to begin with. You indeed are unlucky." "Haha, it's almost like Han Hao was made to defeat you." Gilbert guffawed before